While the world's attention is fixed on the conflicts in Ukraine and the Middle East, something entirely new is unfolding along Poland's eastern frontier, an event that could shift the balance of power across Europe. Many military experts have long believed that Russia had its sights set on Europe and NATO in one way or another. Most assumed this would either take the form of a direct invasion this year, which seemed improbable since Russia's military remains tied up in Ukraine, or that a war would break out sometime around 2030, giving Moscow several years to rebuild both its forces and economy. Yet what very few are noticing are the smaller-scale military maneuvers, coupled with covert immigration tactics and demographic pressure, that Russia is carrying out. And all of this is taking place directly on the Russian-Polish border. This is not a simple border dispute. The situation could draw in millions of soldiers from across Europe and North America should NATO's Article 5 be triggered, and it carries the risk of escalating into nuclear exchanges, even if those weapons are only used in a limited fashion. A hybrid conflict of this kind could challenge the very foundations of NATO's collective defense, which is already influencing the shape of Europe's geopolitics. To grasp what is happening now, one must first understand Poland's vulnerable position. For decades, Poland has stood as NATO's shield, a buffer zone placed directly between Western Europe and Russian aggression. But here is what makes Poland's role uniquely perilous. Yes, it borders Russia itself along a 130-mile stretch with Kaliningrad, President Vladimir Putin's heavily militarized western outpost, armed with nuclear-capable missiles that can strike far into Europe. But the greater threat lies to the east, where Poland shares a 260-mile border with Belarus, a state that is no longer truly independent. Back in 1999, Russia and Belarus declared themselves united under a larger union state. Since 2020, President Alexander Lukashenko has steadily transformed Belarus into what Western officials now openly describe as a Russian military outpost. Through a series of joint initiatives, Moscow has been able to treat Belarus as if it were simply an extension of its own territory. Planned economic and infrastructure projects have been designed to erase barriers between the two countries. Customs checks between Russia and Belarus have essentially been dismantled, while industrial reforms allow Russia to import Belarusian goods with ease. Additional steps include proposals for Belarus to fully adopt the Russian ruble, as well as receiving steep discounts on Russian natural gas, nearly matching Moscow's domestic prices. And like most unions, this one is not only economic but also deeply militaristic. We have already witnessed part of it in action, since the initial strikes on Ukraine were not launched from Russia itself, but from Belarus, which provided a convenient staging ground thanks to its proximity to Kyiv. Logically, Russia is also relying on Belarus as a forward operating base for its other major objective in Europe, Poland, and by extension, NATO as a whole. In fact, tens of thousands of Russian soldiers have been stationed in Belarus in the lead-up to the invasion of Ukraine. Even if Russia is not actively preparing for a NATO offensive through Belarus, it is still keeping troops there to either launch further operations against Ukraine or to prevent Ukraine from gaining any new position inside Russian territory. On top of that, tactical nuclear weapons were deployed in Belarus beginning in June 2023. This move came despite Russia, alongside China, having previously urged other nuclear-capable countries, primarily the United States, to withdraw their nuclear arsenals from foreign soil. As always, Russia follows the principle of rules for others, but not for me, particularly when it involves military strategy and policy. Moreover, Russia and Belarus likely share a joint military command system, which in practice has erased Belarus's sovereignty when it comes to defense matters. Altogether, this leaves Poland not simply facing Russia head-on, but effectively encircled from two directions. At the heart of this strategic reality lies the Suwałki Gap, a narrow 60-mile stretch often described as NATO's Achilles heel. If Russia were to capture this corridor from both ends, the Baltic states would be completely isolated from NATO support by land routes. So how is Poland addressing such a grave threat? By launching the largest military expansion seen in Europe since the fall of communism. And even calling it ambitious might be underselling it. In March 2025, Prime Minister Donald Tusk declared that Poland intends to more than double its armed forces, increasing troop numbers from the current 200,000 to 500,000, reserves included. That would put Poland's military strength nearly on par with Germany, France, and the United Kingdom combined. This rapid buildup began in 2021, fueled by growing concerns over Russia's increasingly aggressive posture toward Europe. At that time, Poland fielded around 120,000 troops, with an initial plan to reach roughly 300,000 by the end of the decade. But with the war in Ukraine dragging on far longer and harsher than anticipated, those targets have been accelerated. Growing by approximately 20,000 troops each year, Poland has already surpassed most major European militaries, making it NATO's third largest force in terms of active personnel, behind only the United States' 1.3 million and Turkey's 480,000. The 500,000 figure Poland is now aiming for counts both professional soldiers and reservists. At present, Poland achieves this strictly through voluntary enlistment, as compulsory service has been suspended since 2008. Still, a senior Polish military leader has suggested expanding the reserve to as many as 7 million, citing Finland's model of maintaining 1 million reservists out of a population of just 5.5 million. Prime Minister Tusk has also pledged to launch voluntary training for any citizen who wishes to participate by 2026, with the goal of preparing 100,000 people by 2027. But this buildup is not only about manpower, it is about money and equipment, on a scale Europe has not seen in decades. In early 2024, Defense Minister Paweł Bojda announced Poland would sign over 150 defense contracts that year alone, worth more than $42 billion. These purchases cover M1A2, Abrams tanks, Apache helicopters, F-35 fighter jets, and HIMARS rocket systems, essentially the full American arsenal for sustained ground warfare, much of which has already proven highly effective in Ukraine. Yet Poland has not relied exclusively on the United States for its armaments. To diversify and speed up procurement, Warsaw signed a $13.7 billion deal with South Korea in 2022, marking the largest defense export agreement in Korea's history. Through this partnership, Poland is receiving K-2 Black Panther tanks, K-9 Thunder howitzers, and 48 Fa-50 fighter jets to replace its outdated Cold War-era air fleet. This is essentially wartime-scale procurement taking place during peacetime. Negotiations are also underway to accelerate the deal and add an additional $6 billion in equipment, including up to 180 more K-2 tanks, with 63 to be manufactured directly in Poland. By securing these production rights, Poland is not only arming itself, but also gaining domestic manufacturing capabilities that could eventually make it a regional arms producer in its own right. All of this comes on top of Poland's role as one of Ukraine's largest suppliers of military aid over the past 3.5 years, having already delivered more than 100 million rounds of ammunition. Much of this came from Poland's old stockpiles of refurbished Soviet-era tanks, a leftover from its Warsaw Pact days. Those reserves have now been depleted, creating space for new and modern systems arriving from abroad. With the expansion of its own defense industry, Poland is positioning itself not only to defend its borders but also to continue as a crucial supplier of arms to Ukraine. In turn, this immediately shields Poland from direct pressure by Russia. Given the heavy losses Moscow has taken in Ukraine, Russia is not expected to attack until that conflict ends. If it does strike, it would most likely be a desperate war fought with nuclear weapons, in which case conventional arms supplies wouldn't matter much. Yet even in that scenario, Poland is weighing its options. When France declared it was open to extending its nuclear umbrella to the rest of Europe, possibly replacing US nuclear arsenals currently stationed in Germany, the Netherlands, Belgium, and other countries, it also began serious discussions about applying this guarantee to Poland as well. If those talks ever turn into concrete action, Poland could potentially host French submarines in its own waters, practically on Russia's doorstep. With all these bold ambitions, one might wonder how Poland, a comparatively small economy when measured against Western Europe, intends to pull this off. That's where things become especially interesting from an American perspective. Poland is not just creating the largest army in Europe, it is also spending a higher percentage of its GDP on defense than the United States itself. Recall how President Donald Trump repeatedly demanded that NATO allies commit 5% of their GDP to defense spending. While most of Western Europe continued debating whether such a figure was even feasible from an economic and logistical standpoint, Poland actually acted on it. Deputy Prime Minister Radosław Sikorski announced that Poland would reach 5% of GDP by 2025. That amounts to $45 billion per year from a country with an economy smaller than the US state of Florida. While Warsaw fell slightly short in its 2025 budget, it still hit 4.7%, with plans to meet the full target next year. To put that into perspective, Poland already surpasses America's 3.38% of GDP on defense, based on 2023 numbers when Poland was spending only 4.12%. That means it now spends more than any NATO member. Trump's former defense secretary Pete Hegseth even praised Poland as the model ally that leads by example. This scale of military investment is almost unheard of in peacetime. Even during the Cold War, NATO members rarely kept defense spending at 5% for long stretches. But Poland is doing so because its military strategists are convinced that war is coming. Outgoing President Andrzej Duda has gone as far as proposing a constitutional amendment to set a permanent minimum of 4% defense spending, locking it into law, with any future increases raising that figure even further. So, what exactly is Russia doing to alarm Poland so deeply? It comes down to Kaliningrad, Putin's nuclear dagger aimed straight at Europe. Despite losing significant ground forces to the war in Ukraine, Russia has maintained formidable strength in Kaliningrad. Back in 2022, the Baltic Fleet included 52 surface warships, among them stealth corvettes equipped with cruise missiles, 4 squadrons of advanced fighter jets, and dozens of nuclear-capable Iskander missiles with ranges of more than 300 miles. Although those numbers have likely been reduced due to combat losses and redeployments, Kaliningrad remains the centerpiece of Russia's regional threat posture. The Iskanders alone are capable of striking every Baltic capital and reaching 2/3 of Poland. Satellite images from May 2025 also show major reconstruction of suspected nuclear storage facilities in Kaliningrad and at other sites near Scandinavia. The photos reveal triple security fencing and advanced communication systems, classic signs of tactical nuclear weapons being stored. Russian economist Vladimir Mao once described Kaliningrad as Moscow's unsinkable aircraft carrier in the Baltic Sea. With Russia's renewed aggression, that phrase has started to feel accurate again. Its location is uniquely strategic, close to nearly all of Europe's main cities, yet far enough from mainland Russia to serve as a forward base. This geography complicates naval access from the North Sea into the Baltic, posing a serious obstacle to any navy not already stationed in the region. If war breaks out, Kaliningrad would immediately become the center of nuclear escalation in Europe. And yet the nuclear factor is not even the most urgent issue. Russia has also spent over 6 months preparing for Zapad 2025, a massive military exercise planned for mid-September that has NATO intelligence agencies scrambling. Officially, Moscow claims 13,000 troops will take part, but Latvian intelligence estimates the true figure could be anywhere from 100,000 to 150,000, once support staff and reserves are counted. The scenarios being rehearsed involve defending against NATO intervention, essentially practicing how to repel American and European forces, while simulating a NATO-Russia war along the borders of Belarus and Russia. This is alarming because we have seen this same script before. Zapad 2021 involved 200,000 troops, and was followed directly by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Troops that had deployed for the exercise remained in Belarus after it concluded, breaking with the usual withdrawal pattern, and just months later spearheaded the northern front of the invasion. Some units then stayed behind to ensure Belarus remained tied firmly to Russia's external strategy. So it is hardly surprising that analysts are now calling Zapad 2025 a rehearsal for invasion, with Poland as the most likely target. The scale, timing, and geographic focus all point toward Moscow preparing for a push westward. Of course, Zapad 2025 might prove to be a feint. After all, Russia is unlikely to pull off an invasion on the same scale as Ukraine in February 2022. Much of its advanced equipment has already been exhausted in more than 3 years of war. More than 12,000 armored vehicles have already been destroyed. Russia is widely believed to have exhausted the entire pool of soldiers it started the war with. And the moment it declares war on NATO, it faces the most powerful and best-equipped militaries on the planet. Put bluntly, it would amount to military suicide. Even if Moscow managed to secure some early victories, NATO would almost certainly push deep into Russian territory, completely bypassing the current stalemate of attritional warfare. From there, the likelihood of nuclear escalation rises sharply, as Russia might turn to nuclear strikes as a last-ditch effort to limit its losses. But even if open war does not break out, Russia isn't limiting its threats to conventional force. It is already conducting hybrid warfare using one of the most sophisticated immigration-based weapons ever employed against a NATO member. Since August 2021, Russia and Belarus have engineered an artificial migration crisis that is nothing short of diabolical in its execution. Here's how the scheme works. The Belarusian state company Centerkurort, believed to be directly overseen by President Lukashenko's administration, works with Iraqi travel agencies to funnel migrants into Minsk. These migrants, thinking they are buying a safe path into Europe, pay between $8,000 and $12,000. From there, they fly out of Middle Eastern capitals, often through hubs like Dubai, Turkey, and Lebanon, before arriving in Minsk. Once on the ground, Belarusian special forces escort them straight to the Polish border. They are handed equipment to cut through fences, instructed to provoke Polish guards, and encouraged to create as much chaos as possible. The numbers alone show how massive the operation is. In 2024, there were 29,707 attempted crossings, with around 10,900 successful entries. At peak times, this meant 100 to 200 attempts every single day. And the most chilling detail, since September 2021, 87 people have died at this border, including 14 deaths in 2024. Poland's response has been dramatic. The country built an 18-foot border wall at a cost of $407 million, stationed 6,000 soldiers alongside border guards with explicit orders to use lethal force if necessary, and created 600-foot exclusion zones. Over 6,000 pushbacks have been officially documented. In addition, Poland suspended asylum applications from Belarus entirely. In a fiery speech, the Polish government even credited its hardline anti-immigration stance for keeping unemployment low and for the absence of terrorist attacks in Poland, contrasting itself with several high-profile attacks that struck other Western nations. But this is not solely about immigration. The real purpose is to destabilize NATO's eastern frontier. By orchestrating this crisis, Russia forces Poland to stretch its military thin, strain its social services, and ignite political divisions at home. This is hybrid warfare at its most refined, weaponizing Poland's own strict immigration rules to inflict maximum disruption. And there is yet another front. Russia is waging an invisible war that NATO is poorly prepared for, and it may be the most dangerous one yet. Cyber attacks against Poland surged dramatically in 2024, with more than 100,000 incidents reported that year alone. We're talking about around 1,700 attacks every single week, hitting everything from government portals to essential infrastructure. This has made Poland one of the most heavily targeted nations on Earth, completely out of proportion with its online presence, its economic weight, or its geopolitical influence outside of Europe. The scale is staggering. Russian hackers breached Poland's anti-doping agency, reportedly stealing some 50,000 files, including confidential medical records of athletes. They also hacked the Polish press agency, spreading false reports that 200,000 Polish soldiers were mobilizing for Ukraine, a move intended to stir panic right before European elections. Rail networks were sabotaged by broadcasts of the Russian national anthem. But these cyber attacks are only the visible layer. Beyond them, Russia runs highly organized disinformation campaigns aimed not only at Poland, but at Western institutions more broadly. These revolve around 5 major themes: stoking fear of war, discrediting Ukrainian refugees, undermining the European Union's energy security, inflaming old historical grievances, and portraying various European states as mere puppets of Washington. Here lies the problem. NATO's Article 5 framework still struggles to respond clearly to such hybrid warfare. While cyber attacks and disinformation can technically fall under collective defense, the murky, below-the-threshold nature of these tactics makes invoking Article 5 far more complicated. Russia exploits this gray zone deliberately, pushing just hard enough to destabilize, but stopping short of triggering a united NATO military response. So what does all this add up to? We are watching the rise of a new Iron Curtain. Not the one that once split East and West Germany, but one stretching across Poland's borders with Russia and Belarus. Poland is taking on the role of NATO's frontline guardian, stepping into responsibilities that were once the near-exclusive domain of the United States. With Washington's strategic attention possibly shifting toward the Pacific and the Middle East under Trump, Poland is rapidly becoming Europe's shield against Russian expansion. Then comes the question of timing. Western intelligence suggests Moscow could strike a NATO country within 5 to 7 years. German intelligence has gone further, warning of possible conventional attacks on the Baltic states before 2030. That means Poland must complete military modernization before that window closes. The rest of Europe must keep pace too. If Russia senses even the smallest weakness or disunity, it could seize on it as a reason to launch a war. Poland's transformation will play a defining role in Europe's security. If it manages to integrate 500,000 troops into NATO's command structure while keeping defense spending locked at 5% of GDP, the entire strategic balance in Europe shifts. Russia would be forced to confront a strong, nuclear-backed adversary instead of the weaker buffer state it once dominated. Yet the obstacles are daunting. Poland faces manpower shortages despite aggressive recruitment campaigns, financial burdens that could eventually require EU assistance, and the monumental challenge of absorbing weapons systems from multiple suppliers while simultaneously doubling the size of its military. These pressures may even push Warsaw to reinstate compulsory military service, which was scrapped in 2008. But this isn't 2008 anymore. The world has changed dramatically over just the past 3 years, let alone the last 15. Thanks for watching. To stay updated on how these military shifts are reshaping global geopolitics, make sure to subscribe to Envelope X for more videos like this. Take care and goodbye.